Welcome to another week of The Vantage Point, where we allow you to peek behind the curtain of where some of the greatest minds reside, to know how they act, how they think, but most importantly, how they perceive the world. So we bring on different speakers, different scholars, philosophers, theologians, linguists, historians, professionals from all different backgrounds who've walked many different paths, but they come here to the vantage point to help share the tools necessary to awaken and liberate ourselves as a people, as Black people, as Nubian Melanite people in today's world, in today's society. I'm excited about today's episode because this is a topic that we really need to discuss. So I don't think it's all going to happen today in this one session. All right, today's topic, sound. Sound is a powerful force. Yet, because it is invisible, we often remain largely unaware of the powerful influence sound has on our lives. So, today we will be taking a closer look at frequency, its effect on the spiritual and emotional state, its effect on perception, as well as how destructive sounds has played a huge role in how we are programmed to function in today's world. So I want to bring in two guests with me today. They're no stranger to the podcast. You are very familiar with Dr. Horace Wright, coming from London, UK, and we'll be bringing on today Reverend Dr.AJ Varmah. I would like to welcome you two to today's episode and thank you for joining me and taking the time out your schedule to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So you're ready to jump in. I know we have a lot to cover, and I'm really thinking it's going to be a sequel because we really have to go deep and dig deep into this topic. So I always like to start with the basic understanding and functionalities of whatever it is that we're speaking about, and today it's sound. So can we discuss how sound is perceived and interpreted? Dr. AJ Varma, we'll start with you, and then we'll continue.
First of all, thank you for having us on the vantage point. When you talk about sound and how it's perceived, am I correct?
Yes, how it's interpreted, how it's perceived, and like how the body processes it.
Well, one of the main things about sound is very interesting is that sound and language both use the same portion of the brain. The languages that we speak, whether it's English, French, Italian, Sanskrit, or the Bantu clusters of languages that come out of the continents, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Arabic, the Hebrew, etc. All of those languages actually use the same portion of the brain that's responsible for learning language. So the way we hear a thing is directly responsible or in direct relations to how we will understand what that thing is, what it is not, or what someone else would like us to believe it is or is not. And all of that takes place via the ears and the way in which the ears have been constructed.
Okay. Now, everyone has their own vibration, their own frequency. So, may you explain how my frequency or a person's frequency will depict how they perceive sound?
Well, a person's frequency, just taking something like as simple as music, when we listen to music, the type of music we listen to, in fact, television, right? So many people you'll meet, those of us who love, drama, or we love, what's the other one? Horror, or we love love, or we love music, or, they love these different kind of shows. It's a direct result of the childhood that we lived, right? If I'm a person that says, "Oh, I love murder mystery," that means I saw murder, or I was around people that was doing some stuff as a child. No, real talk,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And these movies or these shows, they're scored. The people who do the score to the movie are scoring them or putting music to create the feeling that we're going to have with each scene. If it's a murder scene, if Chucky or Damien or what's the other one? Freddy Krueger is coming. There's
Yes.
another type of music. So the type
Mhm.
of music that we like is a direct depiction of the childhood that we lived, right? The
Mm.
way in which we process music is a result, in the shows that we watch, the music that scores those shows or those movies are a direct result of the life that we have lived. You know, if you grew like myself and you may have seen murder as I did, and it was never really quote unquote solved, right? Felt that you couldn't say anything as you were a kid, right? So it never got solved. But because it never got solved, you always like the movies where they're going to solve the murder. They're going to.
Hmm.
It becomes a part of your life. You're actually being shaped and molded by those sounds along the way.
Yes. So, hang on one moment. I'm trying to get you back on the screen here. Okay. So now I want to move a little bit further into it because what I'm trying to establish here is how sound based on the frequency can either determine how, receptive you are to it or repelling you are to it. So I know you, Dr. Horace, Wright, used to be a DJ, or you may even know just from your own, perspective on how it's changed for you throughout the years. Like you may have been more tolerant of certain, destructive sounds or destructive music. So, as your frequency has raised over time, can you tell us what changes took place with you to be either more or less tolerant? However, it may have taken place for you. What correlation would you give us between the two?
I was muted, sorry. Um, Let me say thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to be on Vantage Point. Um, in regards to what took place with myself, like Reverend Dr. Varmah was just saying a while ago, I was listening to when he was saying the effects of what we had as a child, and I was smiling because I used to like war movies.
Okay.
I used to like action movies. So
Mm,
that, and and for me it was like as well when Christmas time came, if I got a gun with caps in it, woo, that was lovely for me.
mm,
So those sort of things was what we was into. So when we talk about sound now, I grew up listening to music from the Caribbean
okay.
as well as some religious music because that was what my parents was listening to. But I also grew up with a little bit of the soul and the jazz. So for myself, what took me out of this, if we're going to jump to the question, because there's more I'd like to go into, but I'll wait for you to take us there.
Yes.
What took us out of that is the fact that I have to say it was music that got me in a conscious mode in the first place, meaning
Mm,
I listened to certain artists and what they taught. Um, they'll be singing things. Dennis Brown, everyone knows Bob Marley, but before when they were the Wailers, um, Gregory, a lot of them was singing reggae, mainly reggae. They were singing about our liberation and what we needed. So
okay.
music got me into that way of saying, well, there's oppression take because for instance, I wasn't taught about apartheid in South Africa. I wasn't taught about the oppression and what happened in Angola. I wasn't taught about things that was happening in Rhodesia, called
Mm,
Zimbabwe today.
mhm,
Um, but these things I learned from listening to music.
mm,
So music got me in that groove of consciousness where I, by listening to music, it was like you'd say your internet today. It was what woke me up and got me to a certain level.
mm,
Now, at the same time, the environment that I was in and the peers that I was around had me going from one way to another, to one way to another, and um, the culture that I grew in also affected us. So
okay.
with this all in mind, it took myself to literally go through these things. It's like outgrow them, I suppose would be the right term. You outgrowing all the things that's happening to you, and then you're saying to yourself, you know what? This I don't need anymore. That I don't need anymore.
Mhm,
And waiting for the right thing to come along.
okay.
You see
Mhm,
what I'm saying?
mhm.
Because And I know a lot of people is going through this in life now, where they're seeking and they don't know exactly what you're seeking, but you're
Mhm.
waiting for the right thing to come along. And
Yeah.
everyone will say, when that thing comes along, you know it when it comes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So then that's what happened to myself. So I walked through many schools as I was waiting for the right thing to come along.
Okay. Okay. Now, one of the things that you did mention is that you were listening to music that had a message, and you spoke about Bob Marley, et cetera, right? So,
Mhm.
is it possible? Because as we speak about sound, we're not just speaking about music, right? We're speaking about sound in its totality. It can be how we communicate, it can be language, right? So, just bringing it full circle, can you use sound to speak to a person in their note, or use tones to speak to a person in their note to kind of move shift them? Because today we have a problem with seeing reality, seeing what's real. A lot of Nubian people in today's society, we live in this illusion, right? So how can you use sound to bend people, and to bend and shift them to a different frequency or a different note to be able to perceive what's being said?
Sound is constantly being used on us.
Mhm.
When every time we go and watch a film and you're seeing, and you know what, like when danger's about to come and they play a certain music and everybody knows, oh, danger's coming, or when
Mhm.
it's that weepy moment
Mhm.
and a certain music plays and it affects you and you start thinking, yeah, you know, it's that sort of, and they play the right frequencies, or the frequencies that they've trained you
Mhm.
to accept. I'm saying it this way because we've been trained to listen to certain frequencies and certain tones, certain music, and have those frequencies affect us.
Mhm.
So yes, those things can have you and make you behave a certain way. Yeah. But
Mhm.
then there's the right sounds that if put on you in the right conditions, it will have another effect on you. Meaning,
Mhm.
if we're now talking about sound and vibration, then we're talking about the universe and how the universe affects us.
Okay.
So we're talking about the sound of Om and how that affects us. You get what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Mhm.
So there's
Mhm.
frequencies that shifts you. Not everybody's shifted by the frequency because we've been numb to frequency.
Mm.
Because, like I said, we've been taught to accept certain frequencies as relaxation frequencies, as hyper frequencies, as
Mhm.
upset frequencies,
Mhm.
as anxious frequencies. And all these frequencies we've been taught to vibrate on someone else's frequency. So
Mm.
it's going to take time, like I said, for myself, because I was listening to real music constantly. It had that effect on me. But if you're not listening to real music and you've been brought up on just electronic music,
Mhm.
then it's going to be very hard to shift you unless you're willing to say, well, what you can tell what I'm listening to is not right.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Now you mentioned how it affects you, right? So that's where we're going to go. We're going to talk more about sound healing and how the effects that it has on the body. So that's the perfect segue. And I want to ask you both, Dr. Varma and Dr. Horace, right, if you want to add to what the last person has said. Like, I want to make it a conversation where it's not just me asking you a particular question. You can add on to what's being said as well, just to bring it home for us today. So one of the biggest things for me is language, right? Especially having a teacher who teaches how language is key. So I like to look at the definition of a word, how it's defined. And what was interesting is, as I was preparing, I looked at the etymology of the word sound itself, right? And I want to share this before we move into the next question. And what it said about sound is, I'm going to read it. It says, sound, when you go to etymology, it will tell you that it's healthy, not diseased. It's sound, it's safe. And it says having the organs and faculties complete and in perfect action. It says healthy, it says strong. And so when I'm reading this, I'm like, well, if that's sound, then and sound is health, then what would destructive music be? So I looked at noise, right? And noise said that it's a sound of musical instrument, etc. But then they had something specifically called white noise. And I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but when I looked at white noise, it says sound made up of random mixture of frequencies and intensities, right? Just a whole bunch of things thrown together. And so that helped to establish that sound is associated with healing. And if it's not associated with healing, then it's not true sound. So every culture has a system where sound is used to heal. In the Catholic culture, it's Gregorian. In Hindu culture, it's the Om. In the Chinese culture, it focuses on the Qi, and the Arabs focus on the recitation of the Quran, etc. So I want to know, in African culture, right, with us being African, is there a system that is used? And I'll pose that question to you, Dr. AJ Varma, and then you can add on as well. I didn't see your hands up. Go ahead, Dr. Horace, right?
No, reason why I said that, there's something that I always, when we talk about sound,
Mhm.
it's like the foundation. I always lay the foundation, meaning let everybody understand that why sound is important. Why is sound an important thing? Why does it affect you? And the first thing we have to understand is that everything is moving. If you talk about your cells, if you talk about the atoms within you, they're all moving, they're spinning around. So anything that's moving must cause a sound and must create a vibration. Therefore, if it's creating a vibration, if it's creating a sound, then our body, if you can plug into it, will also resonate a sound. It's also got a vibration. So therefore, once I can tune into your vibration, I can affect your body. So it's important that everybody gets an understanding that there's nothing that's solid within this realm that we're in. It appears solid, but it's not actually solid. It's atoms that are moving that can also be destructive. You see, you mentioned white noise a while ago. White noise, what part of what I did was not just played music. I was also, years ago, I used to build studio mixers.
Mhm.
And part of building studio mixers is experiencing noise,
Okay.
and especially white noise,
Mm.
because you'll be doing equipment, and then this sound will come, and you hear this, oh,
Mm.
white noise. And every electronic equipment can give you white noise.
Okay.
And that's part of what they used to use when they tortured people. They would put headphones on you and pump white noise in you, and it would disintoriate
Mm.
you and just make you go crazy.
Crazy.
Similar to when the Chinese drop in water on your head.
Mm.
So this white noise, yes, but when you're listening to white noise is part of what they utilize when they started to make the electronic sounds. They
Okay.
were using these sounds and turning these sounds into sounds. Because,
Okay.
like, so when you're saying white noise, especially, yes, and it's funny that they say white noise, because normally you'd expect them to say black noise. But
Right. I was surprised.
but anyway, Dr. Varm, if you don't
Yeah.
mind, you can jump in now.
Yeah. That's perfect.
You're muted.
We can hear you.
Sorry, I said even on the thing of white noise, I saw a
Mhm.
comment just pop up that said babies they use white noise to calm babies down, and they do in many of the neonatal units. They use it in order to block out the noise of the machines or of other babies crying. What they end up finding as a result, though, is that some babies don't respond well to the white noise. Sound has always been used, right, to either heal or destroy, right, cell tissues. The way in which noise decibels have changed, right? If you look at the human species, we're looking at an evolution of the species where the nose is getting the nasal passages getting smaller because of noise pollutants in the
Pollution.
air. The
Mhm.
ears are getting smaller. Our grandfathers and them had big earlobes, and many of us barely have an earlobe. We just have these
Mhm.
little connected earlobes instead of the hanging earlobes.
Mhm.
And so, because of the amount of noise pollution, it is now having an effect on the human species. People who live in big cities where it's constant fire trucks, ambulances, police,
Mhm.
sirens, people screaming, dogs barking, trains, moving about. All of these things, it creates a condition where the species, we're becoming sensitive to sound, and not in a good way, not where we're becoming sensitive to hearing sounds that we normally wouldn't hear, but in fact becoming sensitive to where we don't hear sounds that we should hear,
Mhm.
right? If you take people from a big city, take them out into the country, to the countryside, or to a country that's not as quote unquote developed, they start to bug out. Many
Mhm.
people, the big cities, especially the city folk that really love the city,
Yeah,
they literally
it's
they
true.
literally start saying, "Man, I can't deal with all this. It's too much. No, it's too quiet out here for me."
Mhm.
Think about that saying. It's
Mhm.
too quiet,
Yep.
right? It's eerie because the programming is whenever it's quiet, danger is there. That's through television and movies, right?
Mhm.
Because a baby, you go to sleep in a quiet room, but we've become so addicted to that false sound, to that destructive sound, that now there's people who will say, "I can't fall asleep if it's too quiet. I've got
Yeah.
to turn on the TV to fall asleep." And if it's too quiet, because again, conditioning, Jason only comes when it's quiet. You hear, J, kill, kill, kill. All right, Jason's coming, right? Because it's silence. That's the way the movies work,
Yeah.
right? It's silence. So silence becomes deadly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And thus the saying, silence is deadly,
Kills.
right?
Sign. Yeah.
Silence kills. But
Mhm.
it's not that silence kills. It's not that silence is deadly, but silence is deadly and silence kills when you're going up against racial oppression or against those things that have
Mhm.
reprogrammed us to be a detrimental to our own selves. So we've got to be mindful with sounds, even the tone in which we speak to each other. We've got to be mindful of talking to people and recognizing that most people don't realize the damage from the time they were conceived, right? We were even conceived in agitation.
Mm.
People say, "What do you mean?" If I'm listening to like, do it, kill it, get it, hit it, do it, kill it, get it, hit it, do it,
Yeah.
kill it, and I conceive under do it, kill it. I don't know if there's such a song, right? But it might, maybe it might be the
You
next hit.
just made it.
But if I'm conceived out of do it, kill it, get it, over and over and over and over, and the base is heavy, it if they actually show you spermatozoa, the sperm, under those conditions, under a microscope, and they're literally bouncing all over the place in
Mhm.
this agitated, not hyperactive, in an
Mhm.
agitated condition that results in a lack of activity, brain activity, neural activity, aware activity, and makes it where the sperm becomes morbid and it's not able to do what it was supposed to do. They know this.
Hmm.
This is something that's being done, and the organization that did it back was called again Tavistock. Tavistock out of the United Kingdom.
Mhm.
Tavistock is the one who began Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, and the other people of Tavistock. When those of you who saw your X-Men movies and they had these people kind of manipulating the mutants, well, the mutant is you, right? Because you have a gene, they say this West African gene that they can't determine where it's from, but they know it's not from Earth. So you are
Mhm.
that mutated gene that's supposed to mutate and develop and metamorphosize based off of the environment in order to be able to survive and thrive. You've done that for billions of years. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, Tavistock, a real organization that's
Mhm.
responsible for convincing people who are now in the UK, white people, so it must be true, right? Fighting about having been mistaught about the wanting to remove their body parts, their sexual organs, and change them. And then after doing it, realize I never really wanted that. These people have done this to me. Well, that same Tavistock, and many of them were German scientists out of World War I and World War II. They studied how sound could be used to manipulate. There's a thing people can look up about the gentleman. His name was out of Panama, Manuel Noriega, and how Manuel Noriega, who was the president at the time of Panama, he had taken refuge when the U.S. wanted to depose him of power in his country. He took refuge in a Catholic church because Catholic sanctuaries are like an embassy because the Catholic Church is a nation. And so he took refuge there in Panama, hiding in this church for days and days and weeks and weeks. And they said, we can't get him out and we can't go in there as the Catholic Church. It'll be a violation of international policy. And so what they did was they set up these massive speakers. Anybody listening can look it up. Manuel Noriega. And they set up these massive speakers and they began to blast, you follow, rock music. And they knew, they said within X amount of days, he'll come out or the Catholics will throw him out. Because the rock music decibels that they would, it wasn't just blasting it, but it was a constant, a form of white noise.
Mm.
And after about 48 hours, man, you all know, like, you'll come get me, please. Because
Yes.
no, real talk,
Yes.
they were not designed.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that you see happening today. And unfortunately, if not for shows such as The Vantage Point, if not for teachers such as the Pastor Horace Wright, if not for those who are saying it and saying it in an audible way, right? If we just say it like, yo, I'm saying they got this thing called Tavistock, you know what I mean? And Tavistock, the way they be working, I'm saying, you're going to reach some people's mind, but not in a way where they can even retain it.
Mm.
Instead, if we can say the same messaging to no matter whether from the person that's cool hanging on the street to the person that might talk like this because they went to Ivy League, but if we say it in a tone that encompasses all of those frequencies,
Mm-hmm.
right? Scripture tells us, because being a clergy of the African persuasion, right? We understand that Scripture teaches us about this sound of many waters,
Mm.
right? It talks about that Christ, the Messiah, Yeshua, Kodesh, the African in Revelations 1:12-15, he had a voice, the sound of many waters. So what does many waters sound like? Well, many
Mm.
waters is the crashing of the waves against the shoreline. And that is the sound of raspiness. That is the sound of a melanated voice that black women and black men have, right? They'll make it like black women, you must talk like this, because if you don't, then you don't have a feminine voice, which is crazy. Or we
Mm.
have to talk like this and say, hey, how you doing, Pastor Wright? Oh, nice to meet you. And if we don't talk like that, but that sound of many waters is a sound that grabs all of the frequencies and allows you to have one voice that touches everyone, no matter what sound their ears have been reprogrammed to hear on. So you're touching on the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But if we were to combine do, re, mi, if we said do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, if we put all of those sounds together, it is that sound of oh.
Mm.
Actually, you can look it up.
Mhm. So if you don't have a voice of many waters or the sound of many waters, then you have to speak specifically on the tone or frequency of the person that you're trying to convey a message to.
Yes, or you have to be taught and just develop to speak in your own voice. When we
Okay.
say the sound of many waters, and Pastor Wright can speak more to it, everybody here listening in here at the Vantage Point today,
Mm-hmm.
all of us that are speaking here, we are all born with the sound of many waters.
That's right.
You're
Mm-hmm.
born with all of your ancestors speaking through you, and you declare your tone. Don't confuse individual tone with the sound we make. The
Okay.
sound we make, as you said in the beginning, sound, whole, unique, stable, balanced. Every
Mm-hmm.
child is born with their sound, so much so that if they speak or cry, a mother knows the cry for hungry, for cry for wet, the cry for sleepy, the cry for just hold me, the cry for cooing and laughing. All of those cries are on
Mm-hmm.
a different pitch,
Mm-hmm.
thus a unique frequency that mother picks up because that child is sound. But when a child is not sound from birth, they have different issues we can be born with,
Mm-hmm.
then we're trying to find what's going to make this child eat, what's going to make this child sleep. We're trying to learn the baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Pastor Wright, because I'm all about application, right? So how does a person speak in their tone, their voice, where we're not, no inflection, no white noise? How do we speak in our tone?
It's simple,
Mm-hmm.
but the point is that it's being comfortable. Okay. I'm speaking to you now and I'm using my tone.
Okay.
But most times if somebody meets another person, especially a white person and they'll in English, they'll change their tone. They'll make it sound like this. Why? Because if I sound like this, then I don't sound offensive. I don't sound threatening, and I sound like you. Right? And if I sound like you, then you'll be all right. You become careful with me, and you love me because I speak like this. What it's, I've often see people. I said, and when I speak to them, there was a young lady who was in the Kanisa. I used to always say to her, "Speak your tone, speak your tone, speak your tone," and she would always speak like this, speak your tone, but she couldn't find it, and then she go, "Why do you speak like this?" And she and it's very simple. All you do is first you got just relax.
Okay.
Part of the key of speaking in your tone is practicing chanting,
Okay.
practicing singing, meaning, see that Dr. Varmah, do re mi fa sol la ti do. Most people, if you say to them, go do re mi fa sol la ti do, they'll struggle to do that because they only speak la ti do, and that's all they'll think of do re mi fa, and they'll get caught there. So it's understanding the full spectrum of music and knowing that, you know what, this is my voice. And you first, I'll say part of the best way to do it is to use a mirror and just talk to yourself. Speak to yourself and let your voice go down and feel comfortable. For me as well, it was chanting, just doing the and at first when I started to do and then you realize, no, that's not right. And then if you want it to resonate, and part of the way to learn is to learn your language. When you start to speak one of the Semitic languages, which is a tonal language, it forces. So at that time that I was learning Arabic. So as I was learning Arabic, then the person said to me, say Ain. So, and I'm going, Ain, Ain. And I felt like I say Ain, it sounded funny. And they say Ain. And I'm going, Ain. Sounds like I'm being, but
Yes.
do you understand?
Yeah.
So when you start to speak language and one of it forces you to speak in tones. So when you start, so language is part of the main thing that if we start to learn to speak our languages, you'll speak your tone. If you only speak English, you're going to struggle. Like I said, and when they turn, say, hein, say cough, cough, cough. And they're going, cough, calf, no, cough, cough.
Yes.
No, and I'm just thinking, I don't want to, it sounds like I'm, no, cough, say cough. And by me learning Arabic, that also helped. So it was a combination of things. So I would say really part of the best thing is learn a language.
Okay. What changes did you see once you began to speak in your tone? Because a person was like, man, I got to do all of that and I got to learn about that. What changes did you see? Why is it so beneficial?
What I saw for myself was that as I spoke as I spoke in tones, and I actually could feel my body vibrating at times. It's weird. You'd say certain words, and you can actually feel it coming from here and feel the vibration. Then, for me now, it gave like a confidence.
Okay.
It's as if I'm trying to make it so it doesn't sound spooky. It's real, right? It's as if now you've tapped into your ancestors and they're coming through you. They finally said, "Oh, I can speak to you now. You're like, I can hear you." So I'm not saying you're going to be walking down the road and you're going to hear in the back of your head, "Hello, how you doing? Turn right, turn left." I'm not saying that. But when I was reading, I found now that things I didn't I understood it easier. And it's strange, but if your mind is caught up in thinking the way we've been taught to think, then you reason and perceive things in that same way. When
Okay.
you start to vibrate on the right frequencies, you start to perceive things the way you should. And there's because many people say they'll read something, what does that mean? And I'll read it, oh, that means da, 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 da. Not because I was told it, because it's logical, it's right there.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
if
Hmm.
you're not vibrating on this frequency, you don't perceive things the right. I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
making
oh, that makes a lot of sense because that was a part of, where I wanted the discussion to go because some people can read the same sentence, but they're perceiving two different things. And
right.
so it's like the same message, but we're not interpreting it the same way. So you're saying in order to have that complete or higher understanding or understanding of what you are reading, that it all comes to just tones and it kind of rewires your thinking and the way
Yeah,
you see
it
things.
does.
Okay.
That's why we say when we're reading, we say read it with what mind? An African
An
mind.
African mind.
With a-
Mm,
Because once you start doing that, you start seeing things differently. And it's not just, oh, but I'm African. No, yes, that's part of it. But the
mhm,
vibration changes. And if your vibration is changing, then the brain
mhm,
opens up. And the
mhm,
vibration here changes.
mhm.
Because if the vibration around you is all changing, the brain must change too. And then what does that mean? It means your perception of what you read and understand different. Am I correct, Dr. Varmah? Do you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree. I would definitely agree. In fact, hearing the way we hear, right? We can say we hear with our eyes. We can say we see with our ears. It's like what? No, we hear with our ears and we see with our eyes. No, I said it right the first time. We see with our ears
Mhm,
and we hear with our eyes. Now, of course, most people find that kind of strange, but the
mhm,
reality is, even though we depend on our vision and our hearing separately in our minds, both of them, how the vision, how what I see and what I hear interact with the environment, the way in which I interact with the environment, it depends on how I see and how I hear, and how
mm,
what I see and hear interact. Right? Most people consider, for example, blindness. Right? If I said blindness, we would consider that a greater disability than deafness. Right? A person, if you said if you had to lose your hearing or your sight, most would be like, oh, my hearing, not realizing that how you hear affects how you see. This is what happens, and I used to see this before I started wearing reading glasses. I would be talking to someone early in the morning, a spouse or whomever, and I'd be like, "Hey, such and that." They go, "Wait a minute, hold on, I can't hear you," and they put on their glasses, right? And I would always laugh. I'd be like, "What do you mean you can't hear me? You put on your glasses." I didn't understand that, in fact, you are not just hearing a person, you're reading their mannerisms, you're reading their movement of their lips, you're reading their facial structure in order to be able to interpret and to determine what you're actually hearing, right? So most people don't realize navigating the world, the way we hear things affects exactly our perception of the world. You can learn sign language, you can learn lip reading, you can learn to communicate. You can think that blindness would leave you with your language abilities intact. That's what we would think. But actually, our mobility, how we move, our
Mm.
independence is greatly impacted by what we hear.
Mhm.
And this is something that we want to focus on, because most people don't realize that. And this is why in African theology or cosmology, we Africans understood our tonal language and the clicks that are in the language, or the certain where if I said KP, most people will say kapi, but the word is ba, right? That KP sound ba.
mhm,
And it's a tonal language that it's so important that it allows us to see what's in front of us,
Mhm.
and not only what's in front of us, but what's behind us by how the sound bounces, right? If you ever go in the house and it's real eerie, you don't know if there's anybody here? You're not really yelling to hear is anybody here. You're yelling to hear how the sound bounces. Because if someone's in the room, it changes how sound feels in the room. Y'all understand what I'm saying? You literally can feel that. Does it make sense?
it makes a lot of sense.
Of course.
So what you're speaking of and what Dr. Horace Wright said about the language, is this a part of the African system? Initially, I asked about, is there a system for us? So everything that you're mentioning, this is our system. And how
Yes.
how does one abide by this system without, what do we have to look to?
Well, the first thing is people have to get to a point in your development where we all determine that we've been made spiritually ignorant. We've been made racially blind. We've been made religiously indifferent, where we believe it's all just one and it's all just the same and there's no different. We're all God's children. We all bleed red. No, racism does not exist. All this other craziness, right? That we all have been told is normal. And so, in this uh, overstanding of that system, which we called the science of sound healing, Walzufa, and it is controlled by a tone called Ranun, Ranun, or Ranun. And this sound of this what you call gurgling that babies do, it was composed or designed by melanin mothers, and then subsequently we, their sons, to deal with the fact that our brains mesh with our vision. Our brain literally meshes with our vision, and it meshes with our hearing. And it does it in such a way that it creates a conscious experience of the world. We experience, whether we are consciously experiencing the world or conscientiously experiencing the world or hypnotically experiencing the world. Many of us are hypnotically experiencing the world because the meshing between what we see and what we hear, thus the saying, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, not being able to differentiate between right and wrong, or even when we know it's wrong because society says it's right, we do it. And even when we know it's right because society says it's wrong, we avoid it. Those things are affecting our consciousness. As a result, what you and I see, what you and I hear influences us. What we see influences what we hear. What we hear affects our vision.
Okay.
Some would say that it would even go as far to say that our speech is perceived through the ears. What we see, however, can change what we hear. If
Mm.
I was watching a YouTube video and a person produces the same syllable over and over again, right? Under my umbrella, hey, 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 under my umbrella, hey, hey, hey. And if I watched the artist Rihanna and her mouth moving, I would hear the syllable,
Mm.
But if I looked away, what was can become la, la. If I'm looking at her saying it, under my umbrella can become under my and that
Mm.
now becomes sexualized. And then because
Mm.
I'm watching her and she's dressed in a revealing way,
Mm.
I now start to have a thought that the umbrella is no longer an actual umbrella, but an actual reterming for
Okay.
prophylactic or condom or something of that, covering oneself. This is how it's designed. Your ears hear one thing, your
Mhm.
sight takes it, and vice versa. And even if in speaking, our brain trusts our vision over what we hear.
Mm.
You understand? So if you hear row, your brain doesn't say turn and see what it is. That amygdala says run,
Like,
lion,
go.
bear, gotta go. You
Yeah.
follow? And this is an effect. This is a phenomenal situation or an effect. So where hearing also does affects what we see. If an
Mm.
image is flashing once on the screen, boom. And every time they flash this image, it has a beat, boom, boom. So you see this person, boom, boom. You see this person, boom, boom. You see this
Mm.
person, boom, boom. You see this person, boom, boom. You'll see the image flashing twice. These things that happen, this is how they do in a scary movie.
Mm.
That's Jason, right? If you're listening to what's the other killer? Halloween, Michael Myers. And you keep hearing it. People that are vision impaired, right? Farsightedness, nearsightedness, where
Mhm.
the vision is dominating the conscious experience, makes it to where we end up focusing our attention on what we're looking at and not what we're hearing. So the teacher
Mhm.
can be teaching you what you should be hearing, but you're actually, your mind's like, oh, I like that shirt. You're not even hearing what they're saying. So the person speaking to you has to learn to take their wardrobe and make sure the wardrobe is going to match the message of the day. If not, you won't even hear them.
In saying that, I was in the waiting room in the hospital the other day, and a door opened, and the door had a spring sound to it. And when the spring made a noise, it sounded like the sound of the predator. You know the
Mm.
sound. And straight away I went,
Making sure, yes, make
no,
sure,
no, I'm saying it.
just in case,
I'm
just
saying
in
it.
case.
But I looked to the
He
person
said, "What
beside me,
in
and
the
they looked at
Danny
me like,
Glover?"
and I looked at the person beside me, and they looked at me like, and the two was like, did you just? But it's real. The first, it's only because you knew where you were, and I you looked like inside. I'm going. That sounded like the predator.
Mhm. That's funny.
No, it's interesting you say that because I went through something similar the other day. Uh, I thought there was a mouse on top of the refrigerator because I heard. So I kept saying. So I'm like, listen, listen. I'm like, yo, hold on. And then I realized it's the ice,
The ice
the
melted.
liquid going into the refrigerator. But I had seen a mouse earlier get trapped. And so because I saw the mouse, I heard, man, there's two of them in here. That's the way the mind, that's the amygdala.
That's the way the mind works with sound,
Mm.
especially when you've been trained to listen to certain sounds. Because as we're watching movies, they're training you. They're
Yeah.
training us to accept certain sounds. So when you
Mhm.
hear certain sounds, like what I heard straight, I'm thinking, and I thought it was just me one, but then when I looked at the person, she went, "No, that sounds like the predator." I'm going, "Whoo!" I said, "No, it's a spring on the door." But
Mhm.
once I knew it was a spring on the door, when I heard it the next time, it was a spring
You
on the
knew it was a
door.
spring of the mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm,
So we've been taught to, as Dr. Van was saying, as to see certain things and then create and put a sound to that thing. Now, when you hear that thing, you now think of what you saw, and
mm,
now the ear, like you said,
right.
becomes the vision.
That's yes.
And worse that when you're in raves, for instance, and you're playing music
Mhm,
and there's a DJ jumping up and down and shouting and screaming and
mhm,
people are raving and doing what they're doing,
mhm,
and music that there's certain music that I've heard now and I've listened to them and I'm going, I didn't realize it was saying this
mm,
all the time. And I'm sure a lot of people, you've been raving to music and you don't listen to the words, but
mhm,
those words are in your subconscious are sitting there.
mm,
And I used to wonder why is it that the slackest music sounds the best?
mm.
I don't know if you get what I mean.
Yes.
You will listen to certain music, and as my brother would say, "Stab it, do it." Okay. But you hear certain music, and they're talking about the grinding, the sex of what they, and
Mm,
those music sound better than the conscious music.
mm,
And people tend to rail up to those music before the conscious music. So you're
mm,
in the raves, and if you're trying to play conscious music, you're not going to get a response. You can only slip one or two of them ones that get through. But most of the time, if you play the slackest music, the worst, those are the music that everyone's jumping up to. And
mm,
there's sounds that I'm listening to and that was playing. I'm thinking, is that what he was saying all the time? I didn't
mm,
even realize that he was saying these things all the time. I was just a DJ playing music, and my objective was have you shouting, have you screaming, have you paying the money, me earning my wage. Good and
mhm, mhm.
funny. But now
Yeah.
I listen to some of those tunes. I said, yeah, I used to play these things.
And that's why I initially asked you about how your tolerance level changed. Before you were in the environment, you were able to play it. And now, as you raise your frequency, as you raise your, perception and understanding, then now your tolerance level for that type of music drops. So you would
Right.
say it definitely has an effect. So I want to briefly And I think we're going to have to revisit this topic, as I said earlier, because I want to talk about how it's used to treat illnesses, right? So next time, maybe we could go more into the cells of the body and the organs and the brain
Mhm.
again. But can we lightly touch on how it can be used to treat illnesses? Have you had an experience, you both, with that using Wazifa, right? What experience have you had with it actually making you feel the differences physically, in your body as you may be chanting or as you're using this system?
So if you just took some, if we went to an ICU unit, right, where
Mm,
adults are, one of the first things they would tell us when we walk in there, shh, you're in the intensive care unit. And they want to keep that unit on a certain baseline. You can hear the machines, but the machines are set. Boom, boop, boom, boop, boop. So you'll hear that. You'll hear those who are on the respirator. And that's it. Nurses, everyone's moving silently. The nurses wear rubber shoes. Doctors wear rubber shoes. Doors are very, they're not making the predator sound for sure, right? and, right. And all of
mhm,
this is being done to set a tone
mm,
because they know there's a tone for healing. Then they also keep you in rooms with either no windows or the windows are darkened out. I break an arm, they wrap that arm in a cast. That cast is darkness. Darkness creates an environment where healing can take place. They understood this.
mm,
So when we are looking at Wazifa, the way our cells work, when the cells come, and they've done this with plants, right? You want to take a test, anyone can do it. Take one plant, put it in one room of your house, put another plant in the other room. To one plant, only play inspirational music: Kitaro, Yanni, Sudhan Waldenwinder, Anushka Shankar, Sonia Jabarti. These are more instrumental, African, Japanese, European, depending on your flavor. You're only going to play that type of music in the room. They call it New Age.
mm,
Or Sonia Jabarti, she's a Malian or Senegal, right? And so you're going to play this type of music. Then in another room, put the Eminem, right, and the Twisted Sister and the Led Zeppelin and that kind of Rolling Stones and all over the place. And you play that Grateful Dead, and every day you're going to play that music for 10 minutes. Put the little speakers right at that particular plant, and same type of plant, exact same crop, same plant, whatever the case may be, but it's the same. And the one that has the music that is moving in tune with breathing, in tune, because plants breathe. I don't know if people realize it, but I
Mhm.
heard a gentleman say the other day that we know we're supposed to be implied we're supposed to be vegetarians because animals run and they cry when they're eating because they're not programmed to be eaten. I said,
yeah.
well, if you could hear the frequency of a cabbage getting ripped out of the ground, you'd be like, oh my God, you're like, you're a monster, right? So, but I digress. The sound, the sound.
Sorry.
I'm sorry,
Ooh.
right? But the sound that these things are making, when you understand Wazifa says everyone has an original tone as a race. Black
Mm,
people have a
Mhm.
tone,
That's right.
have a frequency. And it was so much so that when we first started doing music, what they
mm,
called music during slavery, we called it the blues because we were singing in a blue note. You follow? Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. That is what they call the blue note, but that note was African. I can sing the same note. Funga alafia, ashe ashe. Funga alafia, ashe ashe. Funga alafia, I say, Funga alafia, I say. Now they did the same thing. When Nat King Cole was singing, chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose. I can take that same, what they call the blue note, and when we went back to Africa, they were singing it and saying, Akiwawa, Olokalie, Akiwawa, Olokaliye, oh Sheo, Ilakaliye, oh. Tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight. They know that Santa is on his way. They're singing the same song. It was an African note. So,
So they're
James
taking the
Brown,
rhythm.
so they're taking not just the rhythm, the actual
No.
tone and the
Mm,
note that
mm,
is being played in, and
mm,
they're replaying it. And because we don't know this, we think this ain't African.
hmm.
This is not who we are. So that note was used to heal. If a person died and we had to sing, even in Islam, the Muslims, they'll say Fatiha, but this Tajweed Fatiha, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's Tajweed. If there's someone died, they'll say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You can feel the Jewish cantors would do the same thing. They would be Hasmaya ben Israel. And they would do everybody, the Buddhist monks were doing the same. They were Hong Mena Beni 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 Hong Mena Beni. And it's like, oh snap. And then you go to that same monk, Hong Mena Beni Hong Mena Beni Hong Mena Beni Hong Mena. And you felt just in that shift, like, oh, that's different. One, you knew immediately something's wrong or something's more sad, or if it's to heal someone, they would say, Hong Mena Beni Hong Mena Beni Hong. The Muslims did the same thing. Everybody,
Mm,
but all of that goes back to Africa, where we would, our priests would go, and we call
mm,
it an Ayun principle. It was a principle that affects the cells, affect the ears, affect how you feel. Some people are listening right now, and I'm just doing it just so you understand it, right? They're listening right now, going, "What's different? What is that? What? You don't know what's being said, but you know
mhm,
it's something."
mhm,
You follow?
mhm,
If you
mhm,
heard, his name was Oliver Mutudzi from Zimbabwe. If you heard Neria, Neria, oh, what's he saying? You hear
mm.
something, you know it's in a language you don't speak, but the tone resonates with you.
Okay.
So these sounds had power.
Okay. And I like part of what you said because I want to ask as well, right? Dr. Horace, right? You spoke about it in one of your previous lectures, and I read it in the book also coming from you. And you were kind of speaking about how the sounds and the tones played a role in our enslavement. So I want to know, just as a people, right? Could music be used to enslave and program the minds of Nubian people? Obviously, yes. I'm just saying, but let us know how that takes place from your words, and just give us some examples.
Before we do that, part of
Mm-hmm.
what, if you don't mind, part of
Mm-hmm.
what Dr. Varmah was just saying when he was just talking about the caste
Mm-hmm.
and the darkness, it's important to understand that light has a frequency, and they'll say light gives between 700 nanometers per second of light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that all the visible spectrum. Darkness also has a frequency, and all that Dr. Varmah was just talking about a while ago is talking about frequencies of music, meaning there's certain music that vibrates on a certain frequency, and they call it hertz, right? And they'll use 432 hertz. And the 432 hertz, you find when you get that sort of that tonage, it relaxes you. All that Dr. Vam is talking about the 432 hertz and how it vibrates and how it affects the body. And when you look at 432, you get 4, 3, 2. You're looking at 9. It's talking about utilizing that frequency. So when we're talking about how it affects us, darkness itself is a frequency, but they've had us being afraid of darkness, and yet in darkness you have a frequency. I wanted to just talk because there's so much that we spoke about, and as I know we're coming to a close soon, and as we're talking about live in the household that we're living in today, around us, everybody, they have electricity, and the cable's running. And all of these cables give off a frequency. And that frequency allows you or stops you from mellowing or vibrating where we need to vibrate. It really affects because it gives off a magnetic frequency. The same way how Dr. Varmah spoke about when you leave the cities and go into the country, going to silent here. I remember when I used to go to America, I went into silent for about 2 or 3 days. My ears just went wee. I just had a constant ee, and then it would die down because of the frequencies. So it's important that we understand that the music, as we just mentioned, and the way that we take that time out and move away from everything around us. Not that electricity is not bad, but we constantly have it around us, and it's a constant vibration. If you move away, your body actually feels it. Anyway, let's get to your question. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's why I said we're gonna have to come back, because it's, it's deeper sciences to it and things that we can't touch on everything at once. But thank you for adding that. I was asking how this also affects us in the sense of being programmed in today's society, or enslaving us as a people using these tones and sounds, and how that plays a role.
Okay. A while ago, Dr. Varmah spoke about how they use music to get what was his name, to get him out. Who you said was it
Daniel Noriega.
I remember that. I actually remember them doing it. I myself, like I said, I used to make music. I used to make mixing consoles, and in making mixing consoles, I made mixing consoles for Pink Floyd, the Something Dead, all kind of different rock bands would come to where we were and made music for them. And when you listen to that music, what they call rock music, and rock music was something that I grew up with hearing constantly. And when you hear those music around, the frequencies, that what they call electric guitar, that and the distortion and the effect it has on you with that and that they say high frequency. We know it's really talking about low frequency, but it's a high frequency. It's not designed for us. When you see a Caucasian in a rave with that going on, you see them swinging their hair around and they're shaking and they're jumping up and down, and you're wondering what is going on. It actually agitates them. It's in tune with them, and it actually vibrates them, and some of them have orgasms with this because that's the frequency that they're on, right? We are now getting in there, and because you're trying to say, well, I don't want to feel like I'm left out, we force ourselves to get involved with these music and get involved with these sounds.
Okay.
And we go to these events. We sit in, remember in school, they started there by teaching you certain nursery rhymes, and you'd be, I don't know what it was, when we go to assembly and we'd be singing all of these songs in assembly, and they were playing songs, and they get us from there. Then on the radio, as we were growing up, there was only maybe 2 channels, 2, 3, 4 channels. Everything was radio. And it was pop music predominantly that you're hearing. You didn't hear many of our music. So they conditioned us to be taking in these music. And we were constantly just listening to these popular music, what they said was popular music. And then in order for us to make money as a reggae artist or a soca artist, so if you got into the pop charts, you made money. But to get into the pop charts, your music had to change. The 1 and 2 would slip through, and a good reggae music would slip through. 1 and 2 would get through, and it'd be okay. But predominantly, if you didn't change it, like for instance, there's a band called Third World. And they did a track called "Now That We Found Love, What Are We Gonna Do?"
Yes.
Right? And that, boom. Now, none of their other songs were ever like this. But now that they got in the charts, they were trying to do songs more like that. And they lost their, their originality. And now they're just trying to constantly make what we call crossover music.
Yes.
And a lot of the time, we're making crossover music. In making these crossover music, we left our vibrations. We left our key, we left our note, and was now trying to vibrate on their note. And in doing that, we was taking the public with us. And a lot of us made that shift over there to try and stay with them. Those of us that knew, we would say, nah, they're selling out. We call them sellouts. But a lot of our bands, so like now today, there's no reggae charts. There's no soca charts. There's no soul charts. There's no hip hop charts. There's not. Everybody's trying to get in the pop chart. So they've convinced us that if we don't make music like with their frequency, their tone, we won't make any money. So now you got Justin Timberlake and all these white people singing what's supposed to be our songs, but they're not really, because we've changed frequency. Now they can sing them and they sound like they're us. They're playing our music. They sound like they're us, but it's because we've actually changed our frequency based on the fact that we've shifted to their note.
How, when you said that, it just sparked a question. How would our frequency be able to change? And either one of you could answer it. And we kind of switched over, but we keep a certain rhythm, right? Wouldn't we lose that rhythm also? Or how does that take?
No, rhythm is timing, right? You keep it the time. A full note, a whole note is a whole note. A half note is a half note. A quarter note is a quarter note. An eighth note is an eighth note. But here's the interesting thing. Of your five senses, see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, that people know about, there's only one you can't turn off. That's hearing.
That's it.
You can hold your breath, right? Right. So you can close your eyes. You have eyelids. You can hold your breath, your nose. You can close your mouth. You cannot touch anything. Just stand away from everything. But sound, that's why they go after sound.
Get rid of it.
You cannot turn off your hearing. The most, I'm meditating and I block out all sound. All right, and let something run through the room. You're like, okay. I thought you were meditating.
The door closes.
The door open, right? So the understanding of the power of sound is that it can't turn off. So you can throw your rhythm, your tone, but you can change the frequency, how frequent it's heard. Okay. So if it's heard, I can measure that. But if it's, and I can't clap that fast, but if it's where they're increasing the amount, where they say you're hearing, instead of 4 beats per measure, you're hearing, now they've gotten it up to like 300 beats per measure. The ears can't process that. It's happening too fast. Hearing, because of that, we say hearing is primal, so it's part of the instinct. The noise of the world, with not being able to turn the hearing inwardly. You know, sometimes in meditation they'll say, listen to your own breath. Listen to your own heartbeat. Turn your hearing, since you can't turn it off. If you turn it in, you can tune it. So to your question, if they were messing with the music in such a way, wouldn't that change our what's the word you use? Our rhythm. Right. And I said no, but yes, right? No, not in that way. But yes, now the kids don't have rhythm. I remember Kahun Muntu or Dr. Wright was teaching some time ago in the UK. He and I were talking. This is maybe last year, a year before, and we were talking about one of his little ones. And he said, man, the little man was watching some show, and he said, we went to race at the park, and he threw his arms back and was running with his arms back and didn't have his arms moving. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, well, this is how they run in something Ball Z or whatever, Dragon Ball Z. He said, well, dog, you can't run with your arms straight back, running forward. Your arms have to, and he had to, this is real. This is something that's being done. So they're changing the rhythm or the relationship to sound. Let me say it that way. They're changing the relationship to sound. So we're still in sync with the sound, though we don't realize that the new sound we're hearing is counterproductive. So I go to a club, I still see people dancing, and they appear to be dancing in rhythm, but they're dancing to the beat of a different drum. The drum is no longer the djembe. The drum is no longer the conga. The drum is no longer the talking drum or the vaccine. The drum is now what they call snares. An 808, and Pastor Wright can speak more to it, an 808 machine that is psh, psh, psh. I'm tapping this machine and they're saying it's a drum beat, but it's not. It's a sound, a loud sound with a vibration that's in frequency close enough in its frequency to be perceived as a drum. Like telling someone this is a strawberry soda. Strawberry soda doesn't taste like strawberries, but it
Right.
smells like strawberries. So if I trick the smell, you believe that this is strawberry. Orange soda smells like an orange, but it doesn't taste like an orange.
Mm.
Pineapple soda smells pineapple-y, but it
But
doesn't taste like a real pineapple.
true.
But if you can cut through GMO foods or GMO music or GMO things, we look at movies, it no longer are movies with, they say the plot. They used to have real plots to movies. You know what I'm saying? Real, a real a plot, and you have to read. The actors had to really act. Now there's so much. You got old Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's like 100 years old, and I saw on Netflix the other night. No, I'm serious. Arnold Schwarzenegger is 80 years old, and he's on Netflix with a gun, and they said, "Watch this new Arnold." Seriously, and I'm like, this guy's 80. Clint Eastwood is like 90, and he's still punching. Psh. I'm like, he would never put 90-year-old wrist. This is real, right? So they've taken things and they've altered the way the world appears. They've altered the way we see things. And because of all the noise, we don't realize that these things, what we become very unconscious of the sound. We become unconscious, not just of sound, but the way in which the tone we speak to each other. Sometimes you can be around a person in a relationship and they talk to you in a way and you be like, yo, who are you talking to? Well, you know what I'm saying? It's like, damn, where's this coming from? Where's this unconscious disdain in the tone in which you speak to another person? Where's it coming from? And how is it such a powerful thing, but it's going under the radar, right? You don't know that there's a complex nature to our auditory system. That it was the first system formed in the human body. Of the 14 systems, the first system that forms is the auditory system. It is the first fully formed. Let me say it that way. And it's formed because it has to hear the mother's heartbeat, and it has to hear her heartbeat to use the beat of her heart to determine the tone and the rhythm and how this child would personify. So if mother is hearing agitation, feeling agitation, perceiving agitation, that agitation, her adrenaline level goes up, the cortisol levels go up, the adrenal levels, all these things start to happen. And the way the child will perceive, it starts to be thrown off. When a sound enters my ear, my body begins to process that sound on a subconscious level. Each of these little curls in your ear, all the way down into the canal, sound hits each one, and each little piece of the ear itself, each section, you can look it up, each section, if they could take it in millimeters and centimeters and all the other meters, right, of measurement, if you took it, each little section picks up a C note, one picks up a D note, one picks up an F note. All of this is happening. And when that subconscious level, that wave of sound progresses through to the brain, it's processed. It has like almost like if you drive a truck, the lorries, the big rigs, they got to, before they go over certain bridges, they got to be weighed. They have weigh stations, right? Along the highways in England and America, places like such, to weigh it, because if it's over a certain weight and it goes over the bridge, it can actually make the bridge come down. So we, in our cosmology and our theology, we understood that. And so we studied sounds and how sound waves and how they move with the body, how the body reacts hormonally. Why is the word for the fluids of the body a hormone? And then we have a thing called harmony. Harmony and harmony and hormones, same word. Just look it up. Look up harmony, the link between harmony and your hormones, and anyone listening will go, oh, snap. So sound and how my hormones are regulated, deregulated, or manipulated, there's something happening. I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I'll just jump in there if you don't mind.
Yes, yes. Please do.
Oh, unless you wanted to wrap up, we'll save it to next time.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead. And then
I
after
was
that,
just going
I'll.
to jump in,
Yes.
just as Dr. Varmah was saying, because my daughter, there was a time when we was in Gambia and we was standing up just dancing, and I looked at her and I went, she's got no rhythm. And only when we then took her and put her into African dance group that she actually got rhythm again. She got rhythm. So it was the drum that literally brought her back because of all the tonies that we were listening to. So I was just say that no, if you want to get back, you've got to get to our own music. And the African dance, if you got, I'm just telling everybody, if you got a child right now and when they're dancing, you look at them, you go, oh, they're not moving right. African music, it got her right. And I'll say
You
it to
got it
everybody,
right. Good.
it will work because it's true music. And
Mm-hmm.
once you can get to that drum beat, it made a difference. There's a lot more we could go into, but like I said, we'll save it for another time.
I'm glad you said that. I was dealing with that with one of my children. I'm not going to name names so they could be mad at me later. But yeah, so we'll put on some African
African
music.
dance, they dance, it will straighten them out. Trust me.
Yeah, good. So, I don't know if it's anything else either one of you have to say before we wrap up that may be important, an important message on this topic that we may have missed until next time, because I'm booking you both. I didn't ask, I'm kind of booking you both for the next part two. And until then, is there anything else that you want to add?
I would only add, first of all, thank you, Sister Zandi, and for having us here on the Vantage Point, and thank you, Pastor Wright, for joining me this evening. But I would like to add that what role spirituality or religion plays in this. When you take something called the blues, soul music, and we allow European or monotheism, as they present it to us or falsely present it to us, you allow them to call it spiritual, gospel spirituals.
Mhm.
It immediately takes the mind away from your true spirituality and begins to look at the spirituality of another without knowing what that spirit of the other contains. And then this disconnect starts to happen. You each of us, and even I have a daughter, and when she was young, she's 19 now, but when she was younger, she couldn't hold a rhythm and save the world. And same thing, we put her in African dance and other types of dance and music and playing instruments. But in the church, and we who go to the church, even in the mosque, many black Muslims who follow the Pakistanis, that group. We don't follow the Sudanese or the Malians that have soul. We go after the Pakistani imam, and that is not our tone. That is
Mm,
not our tone. And
mm.
we end up removing this thing or disconnecting us from this thing called soul. Perhaps in the next time we come, we can get into that discussion about religion and its effects of how musically it's affecting us as a people. So I would leave there. If Pastor Wright has something he'd like to add, please.
Um, you've closed it nicely. So all I'll say is thank you for having us here, and
Mhm.
I look forward to the next time.
Yes. Okay. Thank you both for joining us. Next time, one of the things that I read, and this is coming from Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, Director of Medical and Integrative Medicine, the Cornell Cancer Preventative Center in New York, right? Just to add that truth confirms truth. Everything that was said here today is being said by other people. Is if we accept that sound is vibration, and we know that vibration touches every part of our physical being, then we understand that sound is heard not only through the ears, but through every cell in our bodies. One reason sound heals on a physical level is because it so deeply touches and transforms us on emotional and spiritual planes. Sound can redress imbalances on every level of physiological functioning and can play a positive role in the treatment of virtually any medical disorder. So I say that to say next time we will be touching on how it affects us on the emotional and spiritual planes, also on a cellular level, as well as what was just mentioned by Dr. AJ Varmah. So we have a lot more to get into. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2. These are the things that we are not taught in school. And so that's why next week I would like for you to tune in. We have someone coming, Dr. Jacintia Higgs, and she is actually a principal at a school that teaches African children their cultural history. They learn about the music, they learn about so many different things that we are not taught in our youth. And now we're just having these conversations as adults. And so we want to make sure that we're supportive of this type of education for our people. So I want to thank you both of our guests again for taking the time to join us on the Vantage Point. I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in for another episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.